And Howard Bank, and thankfully they gave me this fantastic cup here to drink my water in, which I'm going to need. We've done a lot of talking here. We've done a lot of drinking here. And then we waited. And on Friday morning, finally, Ozzie Newsome, the second to last speaker of all the teams, and of course the Patriots don't ever speak because they're the renegades of the National Football League. Luke Jones joining us, of course. Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. Dude, we came out here. We have a good time. I got to see a whole bunch of Super Bowl 35 veterans out here and have some beverages and some food and some laughs. We're out here trying to look at these players, but we knew going in, there was nothing bombshell about an Ozzie Newsome press conference in Indianapolis, which he does every other year.
Right.
This was his final Indianapolis press conference. I didn't think we were definitively going to know that Jeremy Maclin was going to be cut or Brandon Carr wouldn't be cut, and we'll still speculate until we get there on March 14th, but I don't know. It was pretty benign to me from where I stood.
Overall, I think, first of all, it was kind of interesting to ask him if it was kind of a weird feeling knowing that the draft has been the absolute blood of this organization. I mean, it has been the lifeblood.
Every organization, right?
Yeah, but the Ravens, especially in the early years, you think you draft 2 Hall of Famers right off the bat in your first draft in Baltimore if you're Ozzie Newsome. It was interesting to hear him talk in terms of getting some pats on the back here at the Combine, his last Combine as general manager. We asked him a little bit about his role, which still isn't very clearly defined, but he did allude to the fact that Steve Bisciotti said, I want you to work on your handicap a little bit. Of course, playing a little more golf, probably spending fewer hours at the building. So I think that answers some question, but there's still going to be plenty of question there.
I don't think Ozzie wants to work 80 hours a week anymore. If he did, he would keep the job.
It might be he's there 6 hours a day rather than 11.
Look, for any person in our audience or any person who's ever retired from doing something, I did it once. I did 13 years of doing this every day, and then I didn't do this every day anymore. And there was that period where it's like, how do I fill my days? What's going to make me feel valuable? And people change careers, change jobs. But, he's done the same thing for a long time. And in this business, most people don't ever get that opportunity to say, well, let's work part-time. It will be interesting to see how it manifests itself. My impression on this is probably no different than where the Orioles would be with the Jim Palmer, where if there's a kid that's going to work with him, hey, Ozzie, take a look at these safeties and tell us what you think. And I would think that Ozzie probably will be involved this time every year. I bet they would bring Ozzie to – I bet Ozzie wants to come out here and rub elbows with all his buddies and talk to some kids and maybe be in the room interviewing some kids or being an ear for that. That seems to me the part-time job that would – hey, Ozzie, work full-time in February and March for us, hang out.
Sure.
And then during the game, show up during the game, and if we need you during the week or you got some insights, come watch the game. But he's not reporting to work Monday morning for meeting. I don't see that as a role.
Well,
I don't.
I think this is going to be somewhere in between emeritus, where he shows up 3 times a year and really isn't at all involved, and still being the de facto general manager, even though it's not his title.
And unlike Elrod Hendricks, he won't be the guy doing rubber chick. He's not going to be that. We wanted Ray Lewis to be that, the maitre d', the guy.
Some people are better at it than others. And Ozzie, while he's always, anytime I've seen him interact with fans, he's been personable, he's been friendly, he's been polite.
Well, Johnny Unitas was that for this organization, just the tip and wave or whatever.
Right, but he's not going to wow you from a charisma standpoint in the way that Brooks Robinson has for so many decades. But it's going to be interesting in that regard. But bringing it back now to 2018 and the task at hand, which is improving this roster.
He's still in charge.
He very much, more so than John Harbaugh. And I'm not saying that as much as a criticism for John as a compliment to Ozzie, who is in his last year, is already a Hall of Fame executive, has already won 2 Super Bowls, has already drafted 2 Hall of Famers officially now. There will be others, Ed Reed, most likely Terrell Suggs at this point.
Not only recruited Woodson and Sharp and Dion.
So the legacy is intact, regardless of what's happened the last 4 to 5 years, where it hasn't been as good. But it's very clear he wants to go out on a higher note, and he made it very obvious. Look, I don't like the fact that we haven't been playing in January. And he said this 9-10 win territory that we've kind of been building not that they intentionally have built a roster, but that's kind of where they've been. They've been in contention to be a 9 or 10 win team. 9-7 this past year, 8-8 the year before that, with the late loss in those respective seasons. But he made it clear we need to be an 11-win team. We need to be that team that's not coming down to week 17 and Tyler Boyd's catching a touchdown and knocking us out, or Antonio Brown's reaching over the goal line and knocking us out. So easier said than done. You have to do it, but it's very clear that he is feeling urgency. He is feeling heat, just like the rest of the organization, to get better, to get back to where they were 2008 through 2012, more so than this territory where they've been decent but not good enough. And I think the big challenge is, how do you accomplish that, knowing their cap challenges, knowing that they're picking in the middle of each round, knowing they didn't get that third-round compensatory pick, and that's where you have to start thinking about making those difficult decisions. You mentioned Jeremy Maclin. I think it's pretty clear he's gone. Ozzie didn't say that, but he made it very clear. No decision.
There's no reason he wouldn't be gone.
He did not give any glowing endorsement for Jeremy Maclin compared to the endorsement he gave Brandon Carr, which leads you to believe, at least for now, Brandon Carr is going to remain on this roster. Maybe that changes come August.
Brandon Carr was a much better investment dollar for dollar.
Oh, sure, sure. Well, Brandon Carr, for me, and I've written about this a lot, I've even gone back and forth on this. Part of me has said, because he's a $7 million cap figure, because you can save a few $1 million here, this isn't a $1.2 million savings here. This is some real savings. Maybe you do roll the dice that Jimmy Smith's ready to go, and you do have some young depth. But at the same time, if Jimmy Smith isn't ready to go, and we know his injury history anyway, you're really running a risk. For me, it's never been about Brandon Carr, the player. It's been about Brandon Carr's cap figure in relation to the other investments and resources they've allocated at corner. But for Ozzie to speak about his play, for him to speak about his leadership in the locker room, leads me to believe that Brandon Carr, at the very least, is going to be on this football team, at least into training camp in the preseason. And then perhaps at that point, you decide to move on, maybe not so much in a cut situation. Maybe he's the kind of guy that you can even explore with the trade, because he's pretty good value for a starting corner. But if Jimmy Smith's healthy, Jimmy Smith and Marlon Humphrey need to be the starting corners on this team. And then you have an all too expensive backup. That's where the discussion lies for me with Brandon Carr.
Our conversation here in Indianapolis brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Get on out to Rofo when the wind dies down here this weekend. Get yourself some fried chicken, some Western fries. Dinner's on for you. Very easy, and it's great weekend eating. Make sure you're downloading that Rofo app and using that when you're pumping your gas. You're going to save some money, earn some points, and you'll be on your way. Rofo, Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Also, the Maryland Jockey Club sponsoring us now. Cure those winter blues at Laurel when the wind dies down as well. Of course, the entry's now in our morning newspaper, as well as a part of our website at WNST.net. Luke Jones on the set. He's Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. We have watched the Ozzie Newsome thing. I want to go back to one thing that you said very early in the last segment about he doesn't like not playing in January. Like, we never hear from Ozzie, right?
Sure.
And I see Ozzie a lot because he sits in the press box behind me on the road. Mm-hmm. When I'm there at home, I've ridden a bunch of elevators with him after wins, after losses, seeing him milling about. I see him a lot, interact with him a little bit. I know from Alabama and Bear Bryant and the kind of player he was, how competitive he is. But much in the same way that people don't see Joe kicking the wide receiver who drops the ball, storming up and down like a fool like Des Bryant or whatever, and Ozzie was never that guy. I mean, remember Ozzie famously spiked the ball in his first touchdown, and Bear Bryant saw it and told him to act like he's been there before.
Sure.
Bear Bryant expressed disappointment in his demonstrative feeling, but you do know how competitive he is, but you don't know because you never see Ozzie pissed off. You never see Ozzie sweat. You never see Ozzie lash out. Ozzie's been a general manager for 22 years, and we got this goof running the government who every day is tweeting, defecating upon his employees. I've never heard Ozzie call anyone out in that way, right? I mean, in 22 years. So you don't see him as this demonstrative, competitive, blood in his eyes, anger, disappointment.
Right.
We never see that from Ozzie because he's not out there with that. But I would think deep down for him, everything you said about he's a Hall of Fame player, he's an incredible college player, decorated, he's a multimillionaire, he's made tons of money.
Hall of Fame executive.
A Hall of Fame executive without anything else.
He should be a slam dunk in that regard.
This is his last pick.
Sure.
To pick a Hall of Famer here or a guy that 7 years from now is in Pro Bowls, if he doesn't do that here,
you know that's going to bother him.
It's going to bother him.
And if they don't make the playoffs this year, that's going to bother him. And even regardless of what his role is moving forward, and even if they win a Super Bowl 4 years from now, with Eric DeCosta being the general manager,
with his guys,
Ozzie's going to take satisfaction in that because he's still going to be part of it, but part of him is going to eat at him that his tenure ended in the way that it did,
but he's not going to be Dean Pease where he's going to go run the Chiefs 5 minutes. And I can't imagine he's going to go run Alabama as much as they want him, or the Browns would say, hey, Ozzie, this is
right.
This is your Gruden homecoming.
I mean, I guess you never say never, truly, because he does have such deep ties with Alabama, and deep down he still does very, very much care for Cleveland, where that was where his Hall of Fame playing career was. It's funny because someone mentioned that to me earlier this week.
Out, right? I mean,
just wondering, and I have a hard time seeing that. Maybe 10 years ago, if he had decided he wanted a new challenge. Remember,
maybe if he and Steve didn't hit it off.
How many times had he been rumored to become the new AD at Alabama? I mean, that almost became an annual discussion.
Well, that job's been open 5 times since 1998, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many, but multiple times. So I have a hard time seeing that. But getting back to what you were saying, you don't get to be as great as Ozzie Newsome has been over the course of his entire football life without having that competitive nature. And, we hear the stoic comments. We've heard on an annual basis, we're going to stay true to our board. How many times have we heard him saying that, whether it was Jonathan Ogden over Lawrence Phillips or whether it was Marlon Humphrey over someone else in this past year's draft 20-plus years later. So I was impressed to hear, even though I wasn't shocked, I was impressed to hear him speak with the urgency that he spoke with, because knowing it hasn't been good enough, and I just, how that's going to happen, we'll see. I mean, he didn't offer a lot of specifics. He talked about C.J. Mosley, some brief extension talks at the beginning of the offseason, but doesn't look like that's imminent. Now, that could change in 2 days for all we know. He talked about some of the cap cuts, cap possibilities in very vague terms as far as just decisions they're going to make. Made it very clear, and I thought this spoke a lot to not just Jeremy Maclin, but also Mike Wallace. Made it very clear that we're changing our wide receiver room. Part of that is out of necessity because, those guys are free agents or there just isn't enough talent there. But made it very clear that there are going to be some changes there. And I asked him about the tight end position as well. He alluded to the fact that, 2 years ago we had Dennis Pitta catch 80-plus passes, leading receiving tight end in terms of catches in the NFL that season. And we need to find that. We know Joe Flacco likes that. So he knows there's a lot of work to do. He was never going to offer major specifics at this point because we're 2 weeks out from free agency.
Well, we're about 4 weeks out where he'll speak again as part of the
we're about a month
luncheon.
away. A month away there, and at that point we'll have a few more
liars' lunches, Michael.
Yeah, we'll have a few more answers in terms of what needs they address in free agency, what cuts they've made between now and that point where maybe there is a certain position that we're not talking about now that will be a position, not in the first round, not in the second round, but maybe fourth or fifth round. So I think...
Well, you only get one first rounder.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. You
can't all be first rounders.
And that's where this is difficult when you're talking about needing multiple wide receivers. You're talking about needing a tight end. You, in a perfect world, would like to improve at that inside backer spot next to Mosley.
You'd like to draft a right tackle.
You'd like to draft a right tackle knowing that Austin Howard's probably 2018 at most. I can't see he's there.
You'd like to draft your next right tackle.
Sure. And where do you do that? If you do that in the first round, then what do you do with Austin Howard? And if you keep Austin Howard, well, that's a first-round pick that you'd like to have some immediate impact. Suddenly not going to have that necessarily. So
when I think about the compensatory pick thing, right? Like if they had that late third round, that's a place where they might take a quarterback.
Or that's a pick they could have used to trade up.
But I'm just thinking about like a backup quarterback, because they're going to be in the market to do that.
He did mention Lamar Jackson was someone that they have on their board as a quarterback, which that's been a big topic of discussion. Look, Lamar Jackson had such a decorated career at the collegiate level that how do you not explore every avenue? If you really like the player, how do you not explore every avenue, making him a good NFL quarterback, and then changing a position is a last resort if you've exhausted all those other avenues. But, again, getting back to your point as far as the quarterback, he didn't really come right out and just say, yes, we're taking a quarterback. We know Steve Bisciotti already poo-pooed the notion that they're drafting the heir apparent, that they're going to be looking at Josh Allen or Josh Rosen or Baker Mayfield or whoever in the middle of the first round if they're sitting there. But I think it's very clear. Ryan Mallett's a free agent. I think it was very apparent last preseason that if Ryan Mallett has to step in for Joe Flacco, you have no chance. And you do want to be thinking a little bit about the future. Again, if you can draft this year's Dak Prescott or this year's Russell Wilson.
But if you're going to use a draft pick on a quarterback, it's a whole different thing to use your 3 or your 4 when it's your real pick and you need guys to get on the field. That extra 3 would have been.
Oh, no question.
That's where the quarterback thing, because that's the one guy you don't want to put him on the field. Everybody else, you want to get him on the field. If you draft a quarterback, you're kind of hoping he doesn't wind up.
Yeah, the only teams that are drafting a quarterback from the play year one is that you're really, really bad and you don't have anyone else.
And when you need players, first, second, and third round, they better not draft a quarterback there. They have too many needs to do that, in my opinion.
I think so, too. And I don't even know who the guy would be. I'm not sure that guy exists at the 16th overall pick. I'm not sure that guy exists in the middle of the second round. Whoever it is.
You go back to like a Chris Redmond in a third round. Those kinds of picks. I mean, the Dak Prescott thing's an anomaly.
Put it this right. And the thing is, Dallas didn't draft Dak Prescott thinking he was going to play. They had Tony Romo.
Right.
The only reason Dak Prescott became Dak Prescott year one is Tony Romo fractured a part of his back.
Insurance policy.
So, my point is, you're going to invest. I think this is the time to invest some semblance of a meaningful pick. I don't think this is a 7th round, Keith Wenning situation. I think it's early day 3, 4th round, 5th round. If you have a guy that maybe you had a 3rd round grade on and he's there in the 5th round, great. That should be the kind of guy that, at the very least, you hope is an upgrade over Ryan Mallett. And then there's the possibility of that player ascending. Does he become Joe Flacco's replacement eventually? Probably not. But if he is, well, great. That solves an issue in 2019 or 2020 or 2021 or wherever it happens. So, I think the quarterback thing, a lot of people talk about it because it's a quarterback, but I'll go back to what Steve Bisciotti said, and I agree wholeheartedly. They have bigger fish to fry. If they're talking about replacing Joe Flacco in 2019, that probably means John Harbaugh's gone. And who knows what else? What other changes are coming at that point? So
that would mean we have one hell of a bad year.
That means you're going 3-13, and Joe got hurt again, or was really, really bad.
John's in trouble. I don't think it needs to be 3-13.
But even with that, if you're bringing in a new coach, at that point, that's very much a crossroads time for Joe Flacco, because in the same way that Steve Bisciotti wasn't married to Brian Billick in the sense that he didn't hire that guy, any new coach coming in is going to look at Joe Flacco and say,
I don't care what you did 8 years ago.
You're 34 years old and your cap figure's through the roof, and I don't think you fit the system I want to run. Those are the things we'll be talking about a year from now. But in the meantime, while the current regime's here, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to John Harbaugh, but it is what it is at this point, they have bigger fish to fry. As Bisciotti said, they're trying to get back to a point this year where they get back into the playoffs. Things normalize a little bit. Things stabilize a little bit. Maybe only to the point where we delay this conversation we're having now until the next time they miss the playoffs. Brian Billick had 06, but then he had 07, and you saw how much time that bought him 1 year. But they have a lot of needs. Anything before the 4th round as a for the quarterback position, it'd have to be a really tough. That would be an impressive sell to say that guy was so much better. We had such a higher grade on him in the 3rd round that we thought he was a 1st round talent, and he somehow slipped to you. Beyond that, you're really leaving yourself open for some second guessing, because guys are playing for their jobs this year. A number of them, players, coaches, executives, scouts. This is as much as Steve bristled at the idea of the Ravens being at a crossroads. They're absolutely at a crossroads here in 2018.
He is Luke Jones. He's Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. I'm Nestor. We're in Indianapolis. It's all brought to you by our friends at Pizza John's. Maryland's eliminated, but I got my Maryland-related hat down on Back River Neck Road. Get down there and get some pizza this weekend. I know the wind's been bad and all that stuff. It's my mom's favorite pizza, my wife's favorite pizza. I've been eating that pizza for 45 years. They've been there 50 years, as long as I've been around. Go see what all the fuss is about if you've never been to Pizza John's. And, of course, you've already been to Pizza John's. Like Luke, I just made you hungry. Right?
I can't wait to get home.
Got to get some pizza. You got to get some pepperoni. King Discount Liquors is also there. Lottery beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. Baltimore, go give the King a ring on Pulaski Highway as well. And we will be bringing head coach Barry Trotz to Baltimore on March 29th. That is opening day. We're going to do it that night, that Thursday night. It's all going to be brought to you by Freedmont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need the right lender. That's Freedmont Mortgage. Learn more at Freedmont.com. That's FREEDMONT. That's what Carl taught me that because there's 2 E's. He said people spell it wrong. I'm like, good, so we get it right. Fremont Mortgage, longtime sponsor of ours, and they'll be with us on the 29th with head coach Barry Trotz. Hard to say where the turds are in the combine, and I found it funny the Ravens shared the Joe Flacco 08, and he's all awkward looking and young looking and running his 40-yard dash. Orlando Brown Jr. wowed us on the podium on Thursday, then went out, and one of the worst combine numbers you would want for an offensive lineman, right? Like we're trying to get himself into the first round. Nothing about the combine has added up in that way for him, and he seems like just the greatest kid.
Yeah, and that's not to say he won't be a good player in the NFL eventually, but there had been some debate. I mean, I know there had been some mocks, and obviously it's a great story, right? I mean, if the Ravens were to draft Orlando Brown's son.
Well, we were with Marvin Lewis, and Marvin said, I remember the day you were born.
Yeah.
Like, literally.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, and I think, seeing him in his podium session, and look, we saw him for 15 minutes. That's the only interaction I've had with Orlando Brown. But
seems like a kid you want around.
He seems likable.
Yeah.
But at the same time, 14 reps on benching 225 for an offensive lineman. I mean, Saquon Barkley, look how many times he lifted 225, and you'd be shocked. He put a lot of offensive linemen to shame, quite frankly. But 40 time wasn't good. Apparently, some of the coaches were getting on him for loafing during some of the drills. I think based on how he's performed this weekend, and it had been a debate before, you would think middle of the first round for him now. Better be a hell of a pro day. I'll just put it that way. But that's not to say, hey, second, third round, whatever. Put on the tape. The kid could play in college. He played at Oklahoma. It's a legitimate school, obviously.
He saw a real player every week.
Maybe that happening. Maybe that works to the Ravens' advantage. Maybe they take him in the third round, and he's ready to be their starting right tackle next year. I don't know. I mean, he's just one of many players
it goes back
here.
into how seriously you take the underwear Olympics here,
well,
and how seriously you take speed for a tackle, and how seriously I'd be worried about the bench press. I'd be worried about the strength.
You have to. I mean, that's
a strength position. That's all that is.
You take all of this seriously, but it's important to remember these are all puzzle pieces. No one piece is necessarily going to be. Some are more important than others. We know that. But
the game film's important, as you pointed out.
Yeah, and if you love the film, okay, well, bad body needs to get stronger.
We get the kid in the gym.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
right.
Jermaine Illuminor has plenty of upside, but you saw, not exactly a ton of experience playing football, and that's why he's a fifth-round pick. Now,
technique.
Maybe in a couple years we're talking about him as the next starting guard of the Baltimore Ravens. Maybe he's Marshall Yanda's replacement 2-3 years from now, but I think it's just the latest reminder of mock drafts are great in the fall, and you get into the winter and the end of the season, and 2 days, the body isn't even cold on the 2017 Ravens, and we're already talking about Calvin Ridley. We saw that the first week of January. Now we get a little more context. We got some context at East-West Shrine Game, Senior Bowl. You get context here at the Combine, go into visits, pro days, and then 8 weeks from now, when we're getting ready to talk about these teams picking football players for real, there'll be a lot of noise over that time, a lot of BS, quite frankly, and there'll be
including from us.
Most of that BS coming from the media because they're being either manipulated or people are trying to make a name for themselves.
Well, nothing is going to happen until that Thursday night. I mean, free agency will, but as far as these kids are going to sit there for 2 months and be evaluated, and they're going to go up and down boards, and mock drafts are going to come out, and Mel Kiper's going to fall in love with someone, and Mike Mayock's going to say, I think that kid's dropping, and that's for them. Orlando Brown's dropping right now. That's not good for him.
Yeah, and that's not to say he can't reverse that trend, or maybe he was always going to be suited to be a second or a third round pick. I've seen some of the draft pundits say that they never saw him as a first round pick. So you're always going to have various opinions. All of these things count. Every single piece of this timeline, every single part of this process matters, but I think you need to don't get caught up in the moment. There are so many receivers. One of these receivers is going to run a ridiculous 40 time.
John Ross.
And all of a sudden they become a top 10 pick when the talent, the tape suggests
and Marvin's got
not a
splaining
top
to do
10 pick. So,
that.
And that's just one example. We see this every year. We'll continue to see this. I mean, guys will wow, and then other guys who have great tape underwhelm. Maybe not as bad as Orlando Brown, but will underwhelm, and opinions change. And those teams that are consistently really good at this, they're really good at blocking out the noise and taking every piece of information for what it is, valuing it all the way they need to, and then you make the best educated decision that you can make. Maybe not a guess, but this is art, this is science. I mean, there's a whole lot that goes into it, and as much as you try to make it objective, there's a lot of subjectivity here. And as great as a podium session might look, or as great as these 15-minute meetings or official visits later on this spring, a lot of this really just comes down to you're putting your faith in a human being. Yeah, you want them to run fast and jump high and be strong.
All of that is keeping them healthy in a game that isn't about health. I mean,
there are so many variables at work here, and that's not to excuse the Ravens or the Browns or whoever you want to talk about, good drafts, bad drafts. There are a lot of variables at work here that you have no control over. So you try to control as many as you can, handle as much of your business that you have, that you can take care of.
Yeah, I look at Max Williams and say he probably would have been a hell of a football player if he didn't get injured the way he did early on.
Sure.
Because when he was on the field, he looked the part in Minnesota. He's looked the part at various points with the Ravens to get on the field, but he's never been healthy. Perryman in the beginning with, all the leg issues and run. Your legs are no good as a wide receiver. You're just not going to – you're going to stink.
Yeah. Brashad Perriman, who knows? If he doesn't tear up, hurt his knee. I know people.
But look at the Sergio Kindle thing.
I know people joke.
That is.
Well, that was something off the field that was just so. That was so unique how that happened, and there were some red flags about him before that happened. So
there are red flags about Jimmy Smith too.
Sure.
Terrell Suggs, it was a red flag.
Perriman's a perfect example though. If he doesn't fall on his knee and partially tear his PCL the first day of training camp as a rookie, look, I'm guessing. We've seen enough now to think, okay, he probably was never going to be a number one receiver, probably was never going to be the next Julio Jones or anything crazy like that. But if that didn't happen, would he be on his way to at least being Torrey Smith right now, where you'd say, okay, not a number one, but good number two, stretches the field, has some explosiveness to him, brings some value.
A guy that can help you win.
But
period.
And his second year, he kind of looked like he was at least approaching a territory of being a useful player. Maybe not a first-round talent, but a guy that you wouldn't mind keeping around. Instead, you see what happened this year. Got hurt again in training camp, and it just doesn't play with confidence. You wonder how much the health, you wonder how much just the failure at this point that's been there just wears on you if you're not mentally strong. And I don't know that. Only he knows that. But now we're talking about a player in Ozzie Newsome even.
Been a lot of wide receivers in this league the last 15 years. They can run fast, did it at college, high ceiling and all that, and it just – for whatever reason, doesn't work.
We've talked about it, and everyone goes back to that 2014 draft where all these receivers just popped right away. That is so the exception to the norm, and that's not to excuse the Ravens, because if you're really bad at drafting wide receivers, you got to fix it. You can't shy away from it. So I'm not giving them a pass in that regard, but it is very difficult. And look at the last three first rounds, 2015 through 2017. Go take a look at those wide receivers that are drafted, and when Amari Cooper is the best success story, and he didn't exactly have a great year this past year.
Correct.
He had issues. When he's the best success story and arguably the only success story, Aguilar bounced back a little bit this year when Philly moved him to the slot. But
that changed everything when they got a real player. When they got Jeffrey, it changed.
Oh, no doubt. Well, and the pressure was off him. And now the narrative
the interesting thing is if the Ravens got a number one who came in and played like Brashad Perriman should have, it would make Brashad Perriman better.
Oh, yeah, the Aguilar thing's perfect.
Right.
I mean, think about it. Well, and this goes back to another one of my...
Let's go sign Antonio Brown, Brashad Perriman. Catch 50
but this
balls.
goes back to another one of my broken record points over the last 5 years, and I know I've been a broken record about wide receiver, but it's the truth. You can't hide from that. If they bring in a legitimate... Let's say they trade for Jarvis Landry. I'm skeptical that's going to happen given the cost and the draft capital you're going to have to give up, but let's say they do that. Let's say they draft a wide receiver in the second or third round then that at least gives you Cooper Kupp kind of production as a rookie, which would be really, really good to see. Then Brashad Perriman as your number 3 or number 4, maybe he figures it out a little bit to the point where he's never going to get first-round number 1 wide receiver money, but maybe he figures it out to the point that you keep him on the roster.
It's interesting, because John's got such a doghouse, right? We're famously, right?
Yeah.
That he'll dispute. But whether you ever get out of that doghouse to say, well, we don't dislike the kid, I'm talking about Perryman.
They all like Brashad Perryman, the person.
Do you feel like having him around? Do you feel like you can get him onto the field in September, and you feel like you've got so much into him? This is the cut your losses, as they say. Or do you just say, well, there are no losses? I mean, the kid's not making a whole lot of money. He's not a bad kid. Let's bring him back and run him around, and maybe at some point the little red light goes on, and he can become – because he was productive a year and a half ago.
He was. Not at a starting receiver level, but at least a number 3, number 4 kind of guy, and he did catch a few touchdowns. But for me, Brashad Perriman right now is the equivalent of those guys in the mix to be the Orioles' 5th starter right now. I mean, he's just – you're going to keep him around because he's inventory, because you have invested, as you mentioned, that you have invested a lot in him, in the way that the Orioles have invested in trying to develop Mike Wright.
Camp anyway, just have him run around.
But it just and that's the thing. I know he's making some money, but it's not. You're not saving $7 million in cap space, so you need at this point you need warm bodies. I mean, that's kind of what their wide receiver position's like right now. Give him a full spring, give him a full summer. If he can stay healthy and develop a little bit more and be a number 4 receiver, great. He's not making a ton of money. If he's completely inept and isn't making catches in practice and is clearly 6th or 7th on the totem pole, well, you know what? It's time to move on, and you cut him at the end of the preseason, and you chalk it up. We already know this is an unsuccessful draft pick. Now it's just a matter of, is it a complete sunk cost where
Matt Elam,
don't carry him on the roster if you have better guys that you can slot in ahead of him, or can you salvage some level of value for him? We've talked about this with Kamale Correa, and I believe it was Wink Martindale last year, even compared him to Albert McClellan, which second-round pick, you don't really want to hear that, but if that's all he ends up being, well, that still means he does have some value. It's just not the value you were looking for, and it's still a loss in the end, but you have to take the emotion out of these decisions, and cutting Brashad Perriman on March 2nd would purely be an emotional decision, and that's coming from someone who's been very much down on his career to this point.
I'm going to bring it full circle and just say, Ozzie would say right now, we don't have to play till September.
Exactly.
Right, so we're good. He is Luke Jones, Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. We're at the Combine in Indianapolis. Having some fun out here. It is all brought to you, of course, by our friends at buyatoyota.com, and you can go to the buyatoyota.com audio vault, learn all about the Toyotas there, and learn all about our programming from this week. Everything we do is there. You can download the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world, including Indianapolis. It's all brought to you by buyatoyota.com. Our morning newspaper ships directly to your email inbox. Now has the Maryland Jockey Club's entries for Laurel in our paper, as well as on the front of the website, and our morning newspaper brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life guarantee. Last but never least, Luke will have any breaking news. I don't think the Orioles are dealing Manny Machado this weekend, but if anything does happen, you'll get it first on the WNST text service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Of course, Dennis is here every Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home. It is the SSV on WNST. Avoid the wind out there. We're in Indianapolis. You're there, and I'm drinking out of my Howard Bank cup because they're sponsored all of our coverage out here in Indianapolis. They're at the community. Big announcement for them with First Mariner and a bunch of branches opening in Baltimore and around Maryland. So keep Howard Bank in mind. Learn more at howardbank.com. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.